Ian Fleming, at his intriguing best, the glitter of espionage, the lure of easy money, the fever of men and women trapped by the temptations of hot ice, all interwoven in a nerve-tightening web of intrigue and violence, a web that winds from the depths of an African diamond mine right up to Moscow and the top, the Diamond Smugglers. A breathtaking story, writes the Evansville Press. Adventure with a wallop, praises the Omaha World Herald. The Diamond Smugglers. Now pay attention, 007. You can't use this telephone because it's been wiretapped. Possibly by MI5. Who's to say? Of course, we all know Ian Fleming for writing many James Bond adventure novels, and the man who created everyone's favorite secret agent. But sometimes we forget that Fleming didn't just write 007 novels. Indeed, he wrote the children's book Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, as well as two non-fiction pieces, The Diamond Smugglers and Thrilling Cities. Since James Bond books have kind of been in the headlines lately on account of censorship and rewrites and things of that nature, I thought it was time we looked not at these so much, but at those two non-fiction pieces to kind of see what could be changed or what will be changed in them, and what kind of legacy they might have left from our favorite espionage author. And I thought, what better place to start than with the first of the two non-fiction books, The Diamond Smugglers. The Diamond Smugglers is a very interesting read, and it's quite a bit different than what we'd expect from Fleming, but at the same time, it's Bondian enough that I think a lot of James Bond fans will get something out of it, and there's even a few bits that feel very much like reading a Bond novel. Indeed, on that cover, you can see a man who looks quite a bit like Bond as one of the cover illustrations. So when I was a boy, and I was getting into James Bond when I was 12, 13 years old, I bought a ton of these books secondhand. You can see the price stickers from a bookstore that's probably long gone, 15, 20 years down the road. But this one I bought with a lot of James Bond books, probably because as a kid I thought it was one. You can see from this paperback. Looks a good deal like it. I figured today we'll go through the introduction and the first few chapters of this book just to sort of see what they hold. See, there's quite a few chapters, plus an intro and an epilogue. We'll talk more about this in the context of James Bond in the follow-up to this video, as we will need to discuss its connection to Fleming's much more famous book, and of course later film, Diamonds Are Forever. So we got start with this book though. So our intro, of course I read the kind of the press intro at the beginning there, make it sound very compelling. The intro itself is not written by Fleming, but written by a man named John Cottrell. In this book, Cottrell is referred to as John Blaize. He worked with Fleming under an alias. It's pretty brief. Blaize, I'll call him Blaize just for simplicity's sake, talks about meeting Fleming in various social circles, traveling to Tangier to meet him, and gives us some background on diamond work in Africa in the 1940s and 50s. He talks about figures like Sir Percy Sillitoe, former head of MI5. He talks about Sir Ernest Oppenheimer, a man who kind of helped to make diamond mining a large, viable industry. He talks about the difference between professional criminals and amateurs, those who were stealing diamonds for a career versus those who just stole them occasionally, kind of on a whim. He talks about their work with local police forces and other agencies to apprehend major criminals, and although they had only a short span of being professional diamond thief catchers, Blaize's organization, he notes that they did indeed make a lasting impact on diamond security and the diamond trade, and this becomes really the main theme of this book, I would argue. They talk about how they fought the good fight, but was it really worth it? Could they have done more? What kind of changes did they make? In the second part of this, we'll get more into that, because that's the note the book both ends on and begins on. was it worth the struggle? Chapter 1 flips to Ian Fleming's perspective. And Fleming talks about meeting John Blaize. He gets a call and is invited to meet him. We get a very vivid Fleming description of this man, what he wears and what he looks like and how he acts, those sorts of things. If you've read a lot of James Bond books, you probably know the kind of tone that Fleming uses. He tells how Blaize is a good man, a reluctant hero, the quintessential Englishman who doesn't smoke, and so on. We talk about some important terms here, such as IDB, illicit diamond buying. Talks about the Diamond Corporation, official buying and selling agencies throughout the world. Pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot of talk, and one of the most interesting parts of the book actually, about security measures. That some of the security measures put in place were not even real. They built fake ones, like, hey, this machine can scan your body for diamonds, so make sure you don't have any hidden away on you, even though it didn't actually exist. It's a really interesting part of the book. And there's a bit about how, Blaize and his operatives were very tough and resourceful, but they also really liked their job, and they took it very seriously. And they were out to do the right thing. So it's a good setup for this. But we don't want to just read about people patting themselves on the back. We want to see, of course, what did they do? And what kind of crimes did they prevent? In Chapter 2, Fleming notes about how spies are trained to keep their mouths shut. And Blaize is a prime example of that. How spies don't go around writing all these memoirs later in life because they were told everything's very hush-hush. Blaize tells Fleming about how smugglers can create their own identities, they can buy forged papers and so on, become new people, but that wasn't going to stop he and his team from finding them and preventing the theft of diamonds. Our first major anecdote, indeed this novel was serialized, I'm assuming by chapter, so there's usually like a core anecdote or core case for each kind of chapter or section of the book. If you look carefully at these cover images, you can see on the side there is a wrecked airplane. That ties in with our very first story. A young man named Timothy Patterson goes to work for the diamond mines and then begins to think how he can steal diamonds himself and get away with it because he knows how the security operations work. He hides the diamonds outside of camp, resigns his post, and then comes back by plane later to pick them up. But he doesn't get away with it because his plane hits a rock on takeoff and crashes, and the investigation reveals that he was no doubt intending to remove diamonds, despite the excuses that he makes to Blaize and his colleagues. It was all a hoax, and he was busted for it. Although Blaize does note that punishments for smugglers were very light, so therefore, why would people take this seriously? We get a very nice diagram there of the area, talking about Blaize's arrest, or excuse me, Patterson's arrest, not Blaize's arrest. And then we get a weird anecdote about how sometimes people would die on the job accidentally, and notably an ostrich jumps through the windshield of one man's Land Rover, and the ostrich's claws impale him through the heart, and that's how one of their security officials died. So we're off to a good start. We have a very believable, relatable story of a young man tempted by greed, and we have a weird, very Fleming-esque anecdote of an ostrich that apparently accidentally kills an official. There's also a second, less significant anecdote in this bit, talking about a man who worked apparently fairly high up in the diamond organization, trusting one of his friends, saying, hey, I have these diamonds, which he hides in canisters of Vaseline, saying, hey, I have these diamonds, why don't you help me smuggle them out of the country, and I'll give you, a cut of the profit. And his friend pretended like he was going to go along with it, but actually ratted him out later to get a hefty promotion. So that's kind of our follow-up. Chapter 3 starts with a very Fleming-esque moment, and that is something that is so bizarrely written that you almost have to read it twice to fully register what it is. There are several instances of this, such as Gay Men Can't Whistle and The Man with the Golden Gun, Women's Views on Sexual Assault in The Spy Who Loved Me, and of course, the king of them all, his description of Honey Riders nude behind in Dr. No, which you have to read to believe. So here we get one of our first bizarre Flemingisms. The ostrich bit was pretty bizarre, but this one even more so, where Fleming and Blaize are taken on a tour, the economy tour, as Roger Moore would say, on some kind of back street of the African city that they're staying in, and then this young tour guide, who's presumably a child, a young boy, offers them his sister at the end of the tour, and although Fleming notes they are very delighted, they opt instead to chastely refuse and retreat to a local cafe for mint tea. And rather than making a point about child trafficking or something of that nature, we get this rather offhand reply. I don't know. I wasn't really sure what to say to that. It's not the only instance of weirdness we'll see here in this novel today. Anyway, Blaize tells Fleming about what it's like to be a spy, having to work with other agencies and kind of different politicians and different police chiefs and whatnot, and how it's important to be on the boss's good side to get the job done. And then we get this very long, verbose anecdote about a diamond operative named Desmond and how he has to go undercover in this ring, but he can't necessarily meet with the potential buyers, so they have to get another agent named Charlie to help him, but Charlie's found out as a fake, and it's really long and confusing. And the main point of this seems to be that the double agent, or like the guy who's both a police informer and a potential smuggler, is Jewish. Fleming and Blaize make a huge deal about that, and honestly I found it pretty unengaging, and I really wasn't sure what the whole point of it was, but it's followed up by a really interesting bit about embezzlement, that people put in charge of mines or put in charge of mine security were former military, former police, whatever, and a lot of them didn't care about diamonds or diamond smuggling. They joined for an easy job that they could skim a little off the top, and he tells about this one horrible man who was promoted to the position and abused all his privileges and ultimately passed a lot of bad checks and whatnot, and later had to be arrested and was very belligerent about the whole thing. I'm like, wow, that was a lot more interesting than this weird anecdote about, you know, trying to be a police officer undercover as a diamond merchant that really didn't go anywhere. And this is kind of a recurring theme in the Diamond Smugglers. We usually get some anecdotes that are so long and convoluted that they completely lose a reader, and others that are actually really good and succinct. And I like this one about corruption and embezzlement and so on. Chapter 4, Fleming notes that secret agents have their own lingo, and they take a snobbish pride in such things about Burt agents and safe houses and things of that nature. And he talks a lot about some of the gizmos and gadgets, both he and Blaize, that they use, such as tape recorders that were in your wristwatch and they connected by wires to your armpit so you could record different things. And there's a big thing about the use of double agents. People who would either be working with smugglers and ratting out fellow smugglers or their own clients to kind of avoid suspicion or deter police activity. And then also agents working for them who played both sides. Sometimes for the greater good, sometimes for their own profit. We get a big story about an agent named Carl and all these escapades that he was kind of wrapped up in. It is interesting, and it ends with a shorter anecdote about a male flight attendant who was working for them and trying to uncover this big diamond smuggling ring, but ultimately couldn't do it because he was killed in a plane crash before he could pass on the necessary information. Very strange. I guess sometimes real life is like that, though. And we come to the last chapter we're going to cover today, chapter 5. Show you that table of contents again for you. So we'll cover the intro and those first 5 chapters briefly. We'll get the rest of the chapters in the closing next time. But he talks in this one a lot about the steps that smugglers had to take, and that actually smuggling was addressed first at the actual diamond mine itself. That people had to sit through some kind of screening process. They'd go to a waiting room and their clothes would be searched and their bags, and they'd be scanned with x-rays and things like that. The workers are treated far less civilly than the mine employees and the mine supervisors. This is something we'll talk about more in the back half, which is the racism that's kind of inherent in this book. We'll get to that at the end because there's many more instances of it then than there is at the beginning. Not that there aren't a few that I haven't addressed today. But we'll get to that more later, and how this book could be changed, as I believe it's still in print from Fleming Publications. But Blaize compares diamond mines and diamond, sorting areas and whatnot to concentration camps, and says they have tall wire fences and guards and all sorts of things like that. That smuggling stuff out of there is extremely difficult. Not impossible, but certainly very difficult. And how a good smuggler takes his time and is very careful and doesn't really trust anybody. He isn't sure who he should trust, and that they'll often build up reserves of stones and then try to sneak them out, that kind of stuff. And we get another big anecdote, and one that's very strange. It's probably the most unusual part of the book, about a man named Henry Orford, who apparently sent out letters asking people in Africa to mail him diamonds, that kind of thing, and disguising it as something besides a smuggling ring. But they made their own fake person and had him mail Mr. Orford diamonds, and to kind of uncover this ring and arrest those who were sort of feeding diamonds to this guy who was basically soliciting smugglers by mail. It's a strange anecdote because the whole chapter is presented as a series of letters, Mr. Orford mailing directions out and then their agent receiving them and writing back. It's kind of odd and difficult to follow, and it doesn't have a very fulfilling ending, because from what I gathered, they never really caught Mr. Orford himself, the big guy in charge. But it was pretty interesting that they would make up this fake person and have him kind of spill out a few pieces of interesting information and then lure Mr. Orford into giving out, more important stuff that they could actually use to make arrests. So that is the first half of the Diamond Smugglers. Hope you enjoyed that. Next time we'll do the back half, and then coming soon, of course, there will be the Thrilling Cities video or videos as well. That'll be a fun read and interesting stuff, and hopefully in the future I'll have a chance to get out some more James Bond things and talk about them. But for now, in the comments below, please tell me about your favorite Bond novels or other Fleming works, and please do consider coming back and seeing how this whole nonfiction work turns out. And if you have any comments on the censorship of Bond books or anything like that, again, please put the comments below. I love to hear from you. Till next time, my friends, go out there and enjoy a dry martini, shaken, not stirred. Thank you very much.